Hello, good afternoon. So, welcome to part two of our discussion with Ryan Mcmaken. So, Ryan, we're going to continue to talk more about small states. We ended the prior discussion by talking about immigration and its implication. So, small states, Ryan, the World Bank not long ago, quite recently, actually said that small states are likely to engage in trade, and trade is really good for small states. But I'm from Jamaica, a small country, and in the Caribbean, the discourse is usually that globalization has been a disadvantage for Caribbean countries, but it is not supported by empirical data any at all. Small states benefit from trade because they lack large markets. So, in order for these states to progress, they must penetrate the globe. Finland is relatively small, so it's Singapore, so it's Hong Kong. Other small states can achieve. What's so special about the Caribbean?
Right. Small states benefit far more from global trade than large states because large states can make a go of it in terms of autarky, right? When you're the size of the United States, you have hundreds of cities, very diverse economy, lots of resources. Your standard of living would suffer by limiting trade, but you wouldn't starve to death. Whereas lots of small countries would depend very much so on trade to feed themselves, to, of course, build the technology they need and so on. And so, yeah, they should be very concerned with maintaining good trade relations with a lot of countries. Yeah, what is it about the Caribbean small states? Because, of course, there are a lot of very, very small states in the Caribbean that remain poor, although one could look and compare them to countries in similar situations, and one might conclude that they're better off from their location because they are, of course, small states tied to more wealthy areas in the Americas from there. But you're right, they would be wrong to think that the Caribbean is somehow an exception. We can just see, as you noted, right? The small states in Europe, including the post-Soviet states, all have benefited immensely from global trade. The smaller states in South America, like Uruguay, right? One of the richest countries in South America, very dependent on trade. Their economy is dominated by just a few industries. They do very well. And then, of course, some of the smaller states in East Asia, the city states, right? Singapore, New Zealand is a very small economy, small country, and really out there in the middle of nowhere. But they tend to do pretty well
Macon,
using trade.
Ryan, I am from the Caribbean, so I think I can tell you what's the problem with the
Yeah,
Caribbean.
tell me. You tell me.
Caribbean countries, Ryan, don't understand the rules of the game. And I like Douglas North, but in retrospect, I do believe that North was a bit too easy on some countries. Economic growth is not hard. Institutions are shaped by human capital and culture. East Asian countries are collectivistic, but they have higher levels of long-term orientation, and that compensates for the negative effects of collectivism. Without patience and long-term orientation, we can't have capital formation. In most Caribbean countries are led by leaders who excel at complaining. I'm a student of economic history like yourself, and I've never read a book about a leader who propelled this country into the future by getting up and complaining. It
Well, at
makes
some point, right? You've got to embrace the ability to do something for yourself. This is where Eastern Europe has done pretty well since its Soviet days. Is look, we're small countries. We can't compete. We're never going to be big and important, at least not by ourselves. But we can find things that we're good at, and we can trade with them. And we can keep our economies as free as they need to be, where we can maintain economic growth. Now, I wouldn't label any of these countries as laissez-faire, right? They all have pretty sizable welfare states. They all certainly have regulations and even protectionism to some extent. But they recognize on a practical level, you have to engage the world and that the way to get rich is to engage in trade and to work with other countries. And, they could just sit back and whine about how the Russians ruined them and oppressed them and took away their chance at being truly rich Western countries, which is true, right? The Czech Republic, the Czechians would be far better off if they'd never been part of the Eastern Bloc. If they had just been part of the West after the war, they would be much richer today than they are. Nevertheless, they're making a go of it, and they're making some pretty significant gains, and they're doing their best. And of course, yeah, sure, they complain a bit about the Russians and so on, but they're not letting that dictate their own policy. And so they're open to trade. They're open to specialization. They're open to being part of migrant flows, even in terms of getting specialized workers from other parts of the world. So all of that stuff matters. And at some point, you just need to say, okay, we can compete with the rest of the world on our own terms. We're going to make a go of it. We'll never catch up probably with North America, but so what? We just want to get better off. And a lot of countries do that, and they're pretty successful at it.
And businesses should have a commercial mindset. So in the United States, entrepreneurs will invest in training programs. They build research institutes. Some of them will even build universities. And from every now and then, a new management fad will emerge, and people talk about this management consultant who is so brilliant. Therefore, if we hire him, our company will increase profits by 200%. So there is a management culture in America and Europe. Businesses ought to be efficient. They were designed to serve a commercial purpose. In Europe, it's a bit different, but businesses still invest in human capital and entrepreneurship. A business is in Jamaica, when we want to mock an institution, we call it a patty shop. So a patty is a Jamaican delicacy, quite famous, but it is a, poor people like the patty because it was once really cheap. It's really good, but it's affiliated with the working class. So in Jamaica, if we say the Mises Institute is a patty shop, it means it's a crap institution. Okay. So in Jamaica and the wider Caribbean, our businesses have a patty shop mentality. So well, you're not in the Caribbean, so maybe you wouldn't know. Maybe I've read some books, but they're yet to graduate to that management mentality where they're serious about R&D and product development and training people. You go into business to make money. So as somebody who lives in America for a long time, what I'm saying might be a bit foreign, but from my standpoint in Jamaica, a business is really a social enterprise. They do make money, but when I speak to Jamaicans, even executives, I don't get that Schumpeterian mindset. Like a Jamaican Jeff Bezos, or I'm yet to find one. Maybe they exist and I don't know, but I'm yet to find those managers who care about the future and think about the next 50 years, or say, guys, I love this book. You're all going to read the book, because the key to our philosophy is in our book. Our book is based on this particular blueprint. The Caribbean is yet to be as energized.
Yeah, well, of course, we can use other examples. I mean, probably the foreign country I know most about is Mexico. And Mexico is an interesting case because in terms of hours worked per week, the Mexicans are at the top of the list, and right up there with the Americans in terms of how many hours do they actually put in to their wage earning enterprises every week. So why are they so much poorer? Why are they a middle income country instead of a high income country?
It's about capital formation and innovation. That's why.
Exactly. That's 100%. That's exactly what it is, right? It shows the limits of hard work. And that's so that the Mexicans engage in lots of hard work. And that's why they do so much better here than there. Because if you come here and you're willing to work a 50-hour week. In fact, I had a neighbor who was telling me about this because he was from Mexico City. He was saying, you can work 50, 60 hours down there and you're barely scraping by. He says, you come up here, you work 50, 60 hours a week. You can rent a nice apartment and send half your income back to your family in Mexico. And you're living a very nice life. And
why is this the
capital
case?
Formation.
Because of leaders like Jeff Bezos and Sam Walton, people who invest in crafting management structures that will promote long-term growth, not just for very businesses, but the entire industry.
Yes.
It's all about
Right.
capital formation and leadership ability. So in Jamaica, people say agriculture should drive growth. And whenever I hear this narrative, I laugh because when countries get rich, agriculture grows in efficiency but declines in importance. No modern country is based on agricultural production. And
No,
politicians,
100% right. That's a terrible
yes,
idea.
they go on TV and they say we need more young people in agriculture. Agriculture is a backbone of the economy. And I'm like, no, they can't be this stupid.
Well, another thing that afflicted Latin America, in which they've fortunately mostly gotten over, although it's still a bit of an issue, is the idea of dependency theory, right?
Oh
Is
yes.
that sure? We've got to grow all our own food because we're depending on trade, and so what matters is Chilean made for Chileans. Let's make all of our own stuff. And all that then ends up doing is impoverishing you because it takes you out of flows of capital, of ideas, of technology, and then you're sitting around laboring, making all your own food when you would be much better off importing half of your food. And so it's all so much wasted energy. And but a lot of it derives from these nationalistic ideas, right? Is that, oh, we can't let foreigners come in and build factories here because then they'll control us. Mexicans still have that's why Mexicans have nationalized oil, right? They don't want foreigners coming in and setting up big oil operations because they feel that that somehow oppresses them. The reality is it enriches them because it brings capital into their country. But yeah, maybe that's an issue in the Caribbean too, because it certainly has been an issue throughout Latin America, is the suspicion of foreign capital that just holds countries back and doesn't let them develop nearly as fast as they could.
Well, Ryan, I'm sure that by now you know my position on colonialism quite well.
Yes,
Yes, yes.
familiar with it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm thinking about writing a longer. Whenever I write an article on colonialism, it's usually long. I'm planning to write a longer piece. I might send it to my editors. You may or may not publish it, but I'm not backing down. On average, colonialism has been good for countries in the Caribbean and Africa. And this is what studies have been saying. The economists who are publishing these studies, they're not going to be as forthright because that's politically incorrect. But when you read the data carefully, that's the conclusion.
Well, most
Africa and the Caribbean have been laggards for a longer time than Asia. It's the institutional and technology curve. Africa was behind the institutional and technology curve for centuries. Even in the 21st century, there were African countries that were yet to attain British level of development in the early 20th century. So
well,
people,
I most of what
Stephen
I know on the
Broadberry, we
topic comes
can,
from you. So
okay,
I'm not prepared to debate you on that topic because of course our opposition to colonialism doesn't stem from any sort of utilitarian economic
yes.
argument. It's just straight from a
I'm not
self-determination argument.
defending colonialism either. I'm not defending colonialism. What I'm saying is that people non-Western peoples, they gained more from colonialism than Western peoples. So Russia had an empire, so did Sweden, but because people in non-Western countries were behind the curve by becoming exposed to Western culture and institutions, they were given a platform or a springboard to develop. And many of them have failed to use that platform.
Well, if you think about it, of course, in terms of a purely economic point of view, of course, having access to the home market, right? Where you then would have foreign capital, quote unquote, foreign, right? Even though you're part of the same state, flowing into your country, that's beneficial. Where you had, so we've got a bunch of British people pouring capital into my home country because we're part of the British Empire. That's free money
The
flowing
Empire
into your
Effect, the
country.
Empire Effect, and I'm going to list some of the Easterly had a study, Olson had a study, Robinson studies tend to be mixed, Moradi's study that's also mixed. Ariri has a study, and that study is about the disadvantages of of states that were that were autocratic and not exposed to the West. So the argument is that exposure to the West benefited some states. By becoming resistant to the West, people were more likely to regress. So Hariri's paper, it's about disadvantages of early statehood and it's linked to colonialism. But yes, there are several papers on, Barton has quite a few. Lee Gardner has some papers on the empire effect.
Well, looking at the Latin American context again, right, and this relates to what you're saying, right? Obviously, there are reasons to oppose colonialism based on political reasons and slavery and exploitation and the lack of self-determination. However, what they try to then do is, as part of their effort in opposing on moral grounds colonialism, is to come up with these economic theories that somehow colonialism extracts all the wealth from the colony.
I'm laughing again
When
because it was
in reality,
expensive. It was really expensive for Europeans.
right. The flow is actually in the opposite direction, because the Europeans often they wanted these territories for geopolitical reasons. I mean, in a big British, that was a big concern for them, was they wanted East Africa so they could control travel to and from India and India trade and things like that. So they ended up pouring money into many of these areas so that they could maintain control and so that they could use the infrastructure and so on. And yeah, so the flow of wealth was actually into the colonized regions in many cases, and that was true in Latin America as well. Plus, it led to urbanization. And you're 100% right in the sense of remaining agricultural or trying to remain an agricultural backwater does not help in terms of GDP per capita. There's just very few examples of that helping. And so, yeah, you're creating cities, you're building universities throughout Spanish America was very much a thing that was going on. And of course, society was way more complex than people let on, right? The Aztecs, right? The heirs to the Aztecs, the people who lived under Spanish colonial rule, they had their own socially complex society with their own ruling class, with their own peasant class, who interacted with the Spaniards in a sophisticated way. These people were not just a bunch of faceless rabble who just did whatever the Spaniards told them to do. They had their own agenda. They had their own will. They had their own negotiations with the Spanish peninsulares, that is, the people born in Spain. And it produced a more urbanized, slowly industrializing society with many complex interactions among
Brilliant point.
different groups.
Barton, I had him on my show some time ago, Jerk Barton. He and his co-authors, they have a paper on human capital, pre-colonial human capital in the Inca Empire. And they are contending that human capital in that era was actually lower and it might have contributed to the demise of the empire.
Well, and of course, we carried an article not too long ago on how the Incan Empire was a tightly controlled society in terms of right ownership, private property use. Essentially, the regime controlled everything. And so, yeah, to then claim that you had societies like these, that then the Spanish showed up and extracted all the wealth and put nothing back in. Certainly, the theft of large amounts of gold was a crime and a form of exploitation. However, it's not like these areas were simply used to as areas that could be plundered. There were real efforts of colonialization in terms of actually building up society, and it should be noted that the church prohibited the enslavement of these people as well, although locals did not listen. And so you had a lot of different competing interests, attempts to make the local populations full-blown citizens versus the more corrupt elements of the society who wanted to enslave them. And so the story is always quite a bit more complex than they make it out to be. And then, of course, once independence was gained, this obviously did not bring to an end the exploitation. What you then had was just simply a new ruling class that was imposed in place of the old.
Well, I'm laughing because, well, I'm a bit tactless at time and at time I'm a bit tactless when I'm ready. And the truth is that the story is not complex because in history, colonialism is not unusual. Humans have been building colonies forever. People have a problem with colonialism perpetuated by Europeans. That's the issue, but there's nothing unusual about colonialism or slavery or empire building.
Well, I've noted you make that point in your article more than once, right? Nobody,
Exactly.
although if you're familiar at all with Mexican history, including your own history, my ancestors were Chichimek Indians who they inhabited the plains north of Mexico City. And that was Chichimek. Actually, it's not really a specific tribe, it's a region. And this was just a word used by the Aztecs to refer to those people who they regarded as savages and unconquerable because they moved around all the time and they didn't have set cities and all that sort of thing. And they were good. You could raid them every now and then and steal some of their stuff. But there was there was no attempt at real ongoing regularized relations. But those places that were closer to Mexico City, like the Texcocos and those sorts of neighboring kingdoms, who were all, of course, horribly conquered and subjugated by the Aztecs. We never speak ill of those efforts
Not at
of
all.
conquest, even though that would have been horrible, horrible to be subjected to rule by the Aztecs,
And
who
do you know
didn't even
why?
have the level of civilization that the Mayans had. They were far more brutish than the Mayans.
And do you know why it would have been worse? Because European empires were self-critical. There were debates in England about slavery and colonialism. After the Morant Bay Rebellion in Jamaica, there were debates in England. None of European empires were not as self-critical. So if
Well,
you're
in Spain too, there were all those debates
exactly,
over whether you should is slavery a natural thing? Is it something you can impose on others? These were serious debates, moral debates that were taking place over whether slavery was acceptable. Sure.
like today we have books and academic articles talking about Adam Smith and Edmund Burke and their views and hostility to colonialism and Ludwig von Mises and his views on colonialism. We don't, maybe they exist, but I'm yet to read an article saying that the Persians had brilliant debates about the empire and its impact on subjugated peoples. I'm yet to see such an article.
Well, never let it be forgotten that it's the Western Europeans who came up with the idea of human rights. I mean, it's the only place where it really developed. It didn't even develop in the Christian East so much as it developed in the Christian West. And you can go through the causes of that. It wasn't like a self-conscious thing. It resulted from the decentralization that existed and efforts by locals to assert their own legal rights. And this eventually developed into a recognition of natural rights and that sort of thing. But you didn't find it in the old Byzantine
No,
Empire. There was no concept of that. And so then the Europeans took this seriously and thought about the effect of their actions upon the human rights of others. And that is historically unique to Europe. And to the extent that it exists anywhere outside of Europe, it's because they've adopted the European way of looking at it.
exactly. But even in the Eastern Empire, I read a book called Christianity and Freedom, Volume 1. The Eastern Empire also had its its share of contributions to the freedom debate.
Oh, certainly. Well, being Christians, right? And the fact that you had a standard that you had to adhere to in terms of the Gospels. There, there were true concerns over this. It just didn't manifest itself in a enforceable legal way that it did in the West, because the emperor maintained such lopsided amounts of power. But yeah, obviously, invading cities and putting thousands of people to the sword and that sort of thing was considered morally illegitimate, even in the Eastern Empire. There just wasn't a clear way at which you could actually restrain the state to force it to refrain from that sort of thing. So human rights just simply became more systematized in the West, whereas you're right, it existed as a concept in the East, where natural law, that is God's law, superseded state law. And this is something that Ralph Rako liked to bring up a
I
lot.
love Ralph Rico.
Oh yeah, who doesn't,
Great
right?
War. His book, Great Leaders, Great Wars, classic.
And so looking at more of his ancient speeches, or rather his speeches on the ancient world, yeah, he looks at how the patriarchs, the bishops, did not tolerate that the emperors could simply do whatever they wanted, that there were attempts to impose penances and restraint on those emperors. And of course, St. John Chrysostom, of course, is
Yes.
known for denouncing the emperor and his wife and these sorts of issues. Of course, what happened then in the East was that if you're Chrysostom or you're Maximus the Confessor and so on, you end up exiled because the emperor could more do with you what he willed. Whereas in the West, the leading bishops, let's say the Bishop of Rome, right? He could denounce you, but all you had to do was move next door to a kingdom where that prince hated the Pope also, and then you would be protected. So exile or denunciations from the center didn't have nearly the effect in the West that they did in the East.
Yeah, like we have opportunities to learn from history, but few do. No, back Mises is an American publication, but I get the impression that the bloggers they really like it when I write about Jamaica.
Well, because who else is doing it,
Yes.
right? I mean, it's good to have, and I encourage that from people who have local knowledge and can provide case studies that are different from all the usual stuff. And that was part of the why I did my book is I wanted to talk about secession and radical decentralization, but I wanted to bring in lots of examples and historical case studies that weren't just, hey, let's talk about the 19th century United States. Let's talk about the Confederacy. Let's talk about the US Constitution. Okay, those can be valuable case studies, but those have been done many, many times already. And I wanted to look at other examples from around the world and also from the 20th century. And so it's important to have lots of examples and not just speak in everything in terms of theory. So, of course, when I get your stuff on Africa or on the Caribbean, we don't have any articles about that generally, unless you wrote it. I mean, yeah, there's a handful of those things from other articles over the last 20, 25 years. So yeah, we always need more work. I wish we had more Latin Americans writing specifically about Latin American issues. I wish we had some Africans telling
But
me
we do.
about.
We have what's his name? Germinal Van. I read Germinal Van and Tom
We do, but
Alex.
he doesn't submit a whole lot,
Okay.
at least not to me.
And there's somebody called Dumo Denga. Dumo is a podcaster. I was interviewed by Dumo like 2 years ago.
Oh, that's true. We do have a couple guys from East Africa, especially. That's right, who are writing
Yeah,
right
that
now.
the East African from what's his name? I Manuel. Yes.
Yes, right, from one of the former Portuguese
He's
colonies. I
from
can't even think
Mauritius.
of which
Manuel is
one.
from
There you
Mauritius.
go. Okay.
Yeah, Manuel. Yeah. But I like that the Mises Institute is actually diverse. So many organizations see that they're committed to diversity, but they are not. When you
Well,
yes,
never diversity for diversity's sake, right? It's a big world out there, and I think our more educated, more discerning readers, they like to know something about the world outside of just what's going on in the United States. And also, if you just limit yourself to learning about markets from just what's going on in the US, that's just not terribly edifying, especially as time goes on and the big globe will become more and more important.
but yeah, another quick point on Jamaica. So maybe you wouldn't know this, but the British they left a strong state in Jamaica. So Jamaica inherited a strong state from the British, a civil service, a parliament, legal systems, institutions, the churches built schools, and some of our cultural institutions were built by Europeans. You wouldn't know this again, but Jamaicans are not really culturally aware. So had it not been for colonialism, we would not have some of these cultural institutions. With all its, with its, despite its negative side effects, colonialism provided us with a platform. But as I said in my piece on the manly years, 72 to 1980, economy contracted by 25%. Some say the CIA was in Jamaica. I say, so what? It's great power politics. If you offend America or become friends with your enemy, you're going to be destabilized. It's just real politics. But if we're being objective
Well,
and well, I know again you disagree, but I am a realist. If you want to succeed, you have to be America's friend. So if Joe Biden is the president, I love America. If Trump is the president, I love America. It's just real politics.
well,
If you attack America, you're going to be destabilized. It's just real politics.
well, in terms of a military standpoint, yeah, right. You would be nuts to set yourself up as a geopolitical rival in North America. This just, and we've talked about this in the War Economy and State podcast, right? Is look, the United States should not try to be a global hegemon. However, it's going to be a long, long time before the United States ceases to be the Western Hemisphere's unrivaled hegemon. I mean, this is just so obviously clear, right? So you're in the Caribbean, you're in South America. The United States is going to continue dominating the Americas for a long, long time. Now, I think the United States should withdraw from Asia and from Africa and even from Europe. The Europeans do not need the United States.
I
Uh,
agree. I agree.
but of course, you would be nuts as a as even Brazil to try and say, "Oh, hey, America, we're setting ourselves up as a strategic rival against you. We're going to invite in the Chinese and the Russians to set up a bunch of bases in Brazil." I mean, what do you think would happen? The United States would go bonkers. They'd absolutely go nuts, overreact, maybe even start a war. It would be a terrible idea. So, of course, right? You want to make good. And why not? Why not have a complete free trade agreement with the United States? And I've argued this just from the United States side. The United States should have, with all of these countries that show no signs of being any sort of strategic problem, and that includes almost everybody in Latin America, should just have unilateral free trade. You should just announce to Chile, hey, look, you can export anything you want to us. It's fine. We're not afraid that you're going to suddenly become China's ally down there. And if you do, then we would have to reconsider our free trade
Do,
position.
do you know
But
what
until then,
I'm lobbying to
no,
become
go ahead.
an economic citizen of America. So I like it, I don't think it's that radical, but if I want to create an American bank account, I should follow the protocol that's given to an American citizen. So for the purpose of economic exchanges, I ought to be treated as an American. That's what I want.
Well, and I've made that point too, is that if you're going to be a restrictionist on immigration, you need to be very, very open to free trade, because that's then the only way to enjoy the benefits then of foreign labor, of those of foreigners who have a lot to bring to the table a lot of the time
Exactly.
in terms of
And like
innovation, in terms of labor.
in, if you follow the World Bank, Jamaican institutions are not known for efficiency. So if you're smart, you're going to capitalize on institutional efficiency in America. I don't know if you have seen it as yet, but I sent a piece to Miles about athletes. And in it, I mentioned Usain Bolt. So Usain Bolt invested in a Jamaican company and he lost 12.7 million US dollars. And my argument is this: his management team should have known better. Somebody as as affluent as Usain Bolt, his money should be at Fidelity or Charles Schwab or one of those elite management companies in the States. In the States, why would you have 12.7 million US dollars in a country like Jamaica? It makes no sense.
Mm-hmm. Right. These countries should have access to just participating in the U.S. financial system. All it does then is further secure a geopolitical alliance with these countries too, right? Because if you're firmly integrated within the American economy, you're not going to go do anything that makes the United States your enemy, because that would cut you off from all those capital flows. So it's a geopolitical benefit to the United States to have all of this widespread open trade, free capital movement to really integrate all of these other economies and allow them to have the advantages as well and access to American capital. There's really no downside to it. And so on all those issues of immigration, they're irrelevant when you're just talking in terms of free trade. If anything, it reduces the desire to migrate from these countries to the United States because now they have access to American wealth in a way that they didn't before. And so it's been a real bad policy of the Americans that they still have been so reluctant to really open up trade even more so. Yeah, I mean, obviously American trade with Latin America is fairly open, but it should be much, much more
Yeah, like
open than
Fidelity. I couldn't start a Fidelity account because I'm not an American. I don't know if that's an American policy or a Fidelity policy, but I wanted to open up a Fidelity account.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, why not? What's the downside to
Impossible.
us?
It was, yeah, exactly. Maybe I know what I'm going to do. Maybe I should migrate to America and run for president.
Well, let's see. You never know, right?
Yeah, run.
What can happen?
And
that's the American dream, isn't it? Right? Anybody can be president. That's what they used to tell school children.
yeah,
Right?
yeah,
Anybody can be president. As
yeah,
far as
yeah.
I'm seeing, the only way to be president is if you befriend some people at the CIA or you go to Yale or something like
Okay.
that. Normal people don't get to be president.
Yeah, go to America, become president, and have a cabinet, and I'm going to put Pat Buchanan in the cabinet.
Although Pat's got to be like 85 now.
90? No, he's really old. Yeah,
Oh,
I'm
is he
going to
90
put
now? Yeah.
Pat Buchanan in the cabinet, and I'm going to make Paul Gottfried the Secretary for Education. I'm going to fill it with minds like Walter Block. He's going to go to the central bank, the Federal Reserve. Yeah, I'm going to fill it with minds people.
The Fed, yeah, they'll love that idea.
Yeah, it would be so funny seeing Walter Block at the Fed. That would be
Well, of course, back when there was a chance Ron Paul might
Yeah.
might actually win, we of course had our slates of all these sorts of guys, right? Who we were going to have for the Supreme Court and all of that. And yep, that would have been a dream team to be sure. But of course, the regime, they've got their tricks, their ways of preventing people that they view as a real threat from becoming president.
Yeah,
And
like
so it's not just about getting the most votes.
yeah, the Mises Institute has been insulated from mainstream society.
Well, we've been fortunate, right, in that we have such wonderful committed donors who we don't have
Yeah,
to rely on
the
government
Koch
grants
brothers
and all
are
of
the
that
Koch
sort of thing.
brothers. But yeah, the Mises Institute has been insulated from mainstream society. Like I read Reason magazines every now and then, but they have some really silly articles attacking Thomas Woods.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, right. Well, I have no interest in attacking people who generally are doing far more good than harm. That's just sort of a temptation in general in sort of the nonprofit think tank world. Is you should spend most of your time, the overwhelming amount of your time, you should be attacking people at the Washington Post or people at CNN or people officially in the regime, people in Washington, instead of attacking people who have similar views to you at some other think
Yeah,
tank.
but
And
like
yeah,
I just
we don't spend a lot of time attacking Cato.
like I don't understand why these. Well, I do understand. I'm being naive, but these Republican billionaires they give so much money to all these right-wing groups that pretend to be conservative and libertarian.
I think a lot of it just stems to the foreign policy issue. I mean, you got a lot of these groups that they're very aggressive on foreign policy, terrible on social policy. And a lot of the time, I think the donors just don't even know what the organizations are doing. They've just been giving money to that organization for decades. This is, of course, true among the older donors a lot of the time. They're just not even keeping up with what they're doing. And so you've got a lot of these groups where I think the donor base is significantly different in
But
terms of their
Ryan, we have to wrap
beliefs.
up now. So we have to wrap up.
All right.
Yeah. All right then. Bye. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
All right.